this is not sustainable in the long term. Like, I am going to break down, and I don't want that to happen.
Our featured speaker today is a multipotentialite with a passion for connecting people and a keen problem solving sense. She is the project lead for the Action Research Project at Swiss Connect, a graduate of MIT's Beyond Food Bootcamp New Ventures Leadership Program, and an avid humanitarian volunteer. Andrea, it's a great pleasure to have you returning as our interview guest today. Thank you so much for taking time to share this leg of your journey with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here, and I feel very blessed to be a part of this community. I think it's been wonderful what you guys been doing. So thank you so much for the invitation.
I really do appreciate you coming back on, and it's our pleasure completely. I know you and I know each other a bit, but I was trying to think, there are some things that I really have not asked you before. And I know you have a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. I was wondering, how did that come about? Like, where did that passion come from? What was that step like for you?
For me, I think I was always passionate about science, really understanding how the world works and figuring out, for example, why things work the way they do. I remember when I was a little kid, I would leave my science experiments in the back of the fridge and my mom would find them horrified, and she would be like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" I really wanted to understand, okay, why does this type of food gets moldy, or why does it taste the way it does and it makes you feel good, it makes you feel bad? Like, what are the reasons behind that? And then as I grew up, I discovered chemistry and I fell in love with it because I was really good at it. That's one thing. But the other one is that it enabled me to figure out that a bunch of things that I believed were true were actually not. And a bunch of things that I didn't worry about before, I had to worry about now. And so kind of it shifted my perception of the world and the way it is structured, and really gave me a more profound understanding of the way that we interact with our material world in that sense. So when I was thinking about which career I wanted to study, it was really weird because I also wanted to study art. I'm passionate about art and I love it. But then I was very young, and in Guatemala, whenever you propose like studying a career that kind of drifts off the traditional path of engineering, medical science, becoming a lawyer, stuff like that, it's like, oh, you're not going to be able to make money. Like, you need something that it makes you employable in that sense, right? And so I was like, okay, what can I study that kind of brings together my passions? So I was thinking about studying just a degree in pure chemistry, but I ended up not doing that because I didn't want it to be a teacher, which is weird because I ended up being a teacher at some point in my life. Then I was exploring which careers could kind of have that interest for the world and how it worked, and a heavy chemistry approach. And then I went into chemical engineering. But at the second year of the career, I think year two, I started having second thoughts because I realized that the way that chemical engineering works is not, at least here in Guatemala, it's not as much investigation or research kind of approach, but it's rather more like an industrialized operation type of approach. And I didn't like that. So I switched to a double major, which is chemical industrial engineering. So I could be more on the side of processes and economics and all of that. So yeah, that's how that came about.
Very cool. It seems like you've had curiosity for the world around you from a young age. I can understand the experience of your mother when you're little finding something that you've, done something to and being horrified. That's definitely a shared experience. Now, can you tell me the lessons that you learnt studying this? How do you think that's transferred over to the type of work you do now? You have a lot more about connecting people and more general problem solving, I think. And so do you think the lessons you learned during studying that has helped you in approaching this work?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I think one of the biggest challenges to managing projects, especially in international development, is that either people who are doing it have never had experience in the private sector before, or they come from strictly humanitarian careers. And the challenge with that is that the process thinking that you get from a career such as engineering helps you expedite any processes that you are working on. And that was the case for me. Like, of course, after graduating from college, I did the MIT class, and then I've been doing other certifications because I needed to refine my not only my soft skills, but also my understanding of social sciences. But definitely engineering gives you a process perspective that I don't think a lot of other careers do. STEM careers in general make you think about the why behind the scenes. And then, of course, understanding things from a systemic perspective. Like you are thinking about a system, you are thinking about the components of a chemical reaction and why is catalyzing that reaction. And you apply that to people. If you get group A with group B, there may be an explosive reaction. So you don't want to get them together because you know it's going to go wrong. So I think thinking about people in the sense of they are embedded within a system, and that system has components that you have to pay attention to. And these are kind of like the catalysts or what can stop the progress of what you want to do, really gives you a more profound understanding of how to move projects forward.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I really appreciate your answer to my first question too, because I think it really, I know that you're a person with, a varied skill set and set of interests, but I think that really kind of epitomizes the breadth and width of your passion and your work. I was wondering if you could, I know you've talked to us about your 9 to 5 job, if you will, even though it's probably not 9 to 5 as a project lead for action research project at Swiss Connect, but I was looking on LinkedIn and I saw about a month ago that you had helped to facilitate an event for Swiss Entrepreneurship Program Peru, which I thought was really cool. So I've seen in action, how great you are at getting people excited around learning and interacting. When did you learn that you had like such an innate ability to help people like kind of let their hair down and really open up in that sort of setting? Because it looked like you had like both, if I'm right, like, young entrepreneurs, and then you also had like VCs. And I know sometimes it's like a difficult group to help get to know each other.
So I wouldn't say it's a natural talent. Honestly, it is not. I am normally quite introverted. Like if you ask me, what would you like to do on a Friday night? Oh my God, let's cozy up and stay home. I'm a
Aw.
homebody. I then realized that there are a lot of techniques that you can learn. So I dove into design thinking, for example, but like more human centered design, because I realized that you could approach people as you approached mathematical problems. Like each person is their own world and they are complicated enough. And understanding that gives you a more, I would say, open and patient perspective about others. And when you are interacting with them, if you think about people like, let's say, they may be having a bad day today or they are having a great day and that's what they are engaged. Like I kind of really want to make sure that everybody who is here is present and is enjoying the experience, and that way they can actually connect. And then of course design thinking gives you a lot of tools, a lot of useful processes that you can do to actually get people working and kind of cranking their mind gears to give a solution to a problem. And another thing that I also learned that helped me tremendously in connecting others is losing my fear to being ridiculed. And that is a thing that for me was tremendously difficult because I am very self conscious. Like I am a person who's always like, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that, my hair, my nails, whatever. And I think just figuring out that as I am not constantly thinking about what others are wearing or what they said, and I don't dwell on that for days and ages, it's very likely that other people don't do that about myself either. So let's focus on what's really important, which is connecting each other and really understanding that, yeah, maybe I said a funny thing that didn't came off as great, but nobody's going to be thinking about this in 10 years time. They're going to be thinking about how they felt, how they connected, what was the feeling behind that workshop, that interaction. And once you frame interactions with others under that perspective, under that light, then it becomes so much easier to connect with people, because you realize, regardless of where they come from, who they are, there's going to be things that you have in common. Even if you don't like the same music, even if you don't like the same entertainment and all of that, we're all human. And fundamentally, we all want the same thing. We just want to be happy, and we want to have comfort and ease and fulfillment. And so, under that light, it's very easy to connect with others.
Honestly, I think it's such a superpower to be willing to accept you're not everyone else's focus for when you're worrying about things and, you're anxious about things, and being like, I'm just gonna, do my best, engage with these people as well as I can, and, try and make sure they have the best experience possible. I think it's in today's age where people are, constantly anxious about how they look, how they sound, what they're doing. I think it's so powerful to be willing to, put that aside and just try and engage with the moment that you're having it. And I really respect that you've developed that in yourself, even if it's something that didn't entirely come naturally. I think that's really great. We talked a little bit in the introduction. Nancy used the term multipotentialite. And I think this is an interesting term. I believe it is similar to sort of a polymath concept. Could you talk to us a little bit about that, and how sort of the other interests you have, like you mentioned earlier, have helped you in the various things that you've worked on?
Yeah, I think I should have prefaced that by saying I'm a huge nerd. So when you think about it, the best analogy that I can use is the chaotic good type of personality in D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. So that's me. Like, I don't think, and when I finally understood that's me in real life, it was easier for me to figure out, okay, I want to give myself free reign to explore my interests, to explore what I want to do. And not in a sense, and this is another thing that I have learned that has helped me tremendously. Exploring something you want to do does not necessarily mean you have to be good at it. Does not necessarily mean you have to right off the bat be fantastic and be able to monetize it. And so, for example, let's say I like knitting. I love knitting. I have a group of friends that we get together every week, and it's called Stitch, and a word that rhymes with it that I'm not going to say.
I know what the word is there.
So we get together and we knit, and I am terrible at it. And I'm slowly but surely getting somewhat better. Like, my socks look better now, but I do not necessarily expect myself to be fantastic from the get-go, because it's not going to happen. And yes, I have had things where I'm naturally good at. For example, I showed a talent from a very early age to plastic art. So I'm good at painting, drawing, sculpting. I'm good at that, but does not necessarily transfer into other things. However, I do realize that there are transferable skills that you learn from, let's say, painting, to understanding. For example, I want to take a photograph for my project, and this is the light, and this is the best framing, and this is the way it's going to look better. And then I can use that photograph to tell a story and relate the project to either a new donor or even the beneficiaries themselves, to really understand how they are benefiting from that. And let's say knitting. I love knitting. I'm not great at it, but the concept of knitting has led me to build stronger networks of the people that I know. And for me, each introduction that I make could be like type of specific stitch, for example, that I'm doing. And reading and exploring and writing kind of helped me, let's say, center my thoughts and really understand whether or not what I did today or the day before is making sense in terms of the goals in life that I want to get to. For me, being a multipotentialite means, first of all, you are not afraid to learn, and you understand that you're not going to be great at everything from the get go, but you are going to learn. And then, of course, figuring which of those passions you can bring into your working life, into your purpose, and into the way that you interact with others. So, other thing that I love is learning languages. I am learning Italian, French, and Japanese now. And so, for me, approaching the language learning from a cultural perspective, like understanding why the grammar is structured the way it is, why certain words are prioritized and others are not, gives me a more interesting cultural insight of what the people are thinking. One of my favorite examples of that is, have you heard the expression island time? Like when people say, yeah, they're on island time. Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes,
the
yes.
main reason for that is because Polynesian cultures and island cultures do not refer to time in terms of money. So when we talk about time in English, for example, we say I'm spending time. It's a finite resource, right? So there's a time frame that I have to attach to, because otherwise I'm spending a finite resource that I have. Whereas in a lot of Polynesian cultures and island cultures, time is not referred as something that you can spend, something that you have, but something that you are embedded within. And so, how language influences culture and culture influences language gives you a lot of insight when working with people from other cultures, from other languages, and you understand their perspective a bit better. I think when you let the good bleed into everything you do, you're going to find connections amongst many things. And then, of course, be willing to be terrible at something to eventually become good at it, I think.
I love that you took that term and kind of, gave like your philosophy, for kind of approaching everything. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I love that you have that word on your LinkedIn profile. And I think the more that I've come to know you, it makes sense as a term to describe you. I really respect that you do so much volunteer work as well. And I know that I haven't asked you about this because I've meant to, even in our personal conversations. Can you tell me how you became involved with like two seemingly very different organizations that both seem to continue to make a really meaningful humanitarian impact? So I saw TECO, which is, I believe, a Guatemalan based organization focused on disaster relief. And then I may butcher this, but the Puento Belize labor education project, with which offers administration fundamentals classes and supports equitable job opportunities for young people in Guatemala.
Yeah, I think for me, volunteering started when I was a child because my dad and my mom were like volunteers. My dad was not religious at all, but we lived nearby a church, and my grandma was like super religious, and she would go to that church. So I remember like she would come to my dad and she would be like, the church needs a new roof. And so my dad was be like, I'll get around it. And then he wouldn't go to the church, but you would see him like in the middle of the week just fixing the roof or the lighting fixtures or anything they needed, because for him it was important that his mom and the rest of the community had a place to gather. That is something that I grew up with, and we would go to these villages and we would kind of take clothing or food or things that people needed. And then it kind of continued up until my secondary education and college. I volunteered a lot with Techo because it's a Chilean organization actually, and they build homes for people who are in poverty or who are displaced. I haven't been with them in a hot minute, honestly. And then with Puente Belice, it was because they were nearby the university where I was studying. They had a small school in there. And so I've always loved kind of sharing what I know, not necessarily teaching. And that's, I think, a difference because teaching, you need to be more structured, more kind of, yeah, have a structure. But I loved sharing what I know. So I was teaching their economics for people who were in high school when I was in college. I always wanted to kind of give back in some way, shape, or form, because I recognize that as humans, we are the result of the opportunities we get. And that even though talent is equal, opportunities are not. And so if I have been given so many opportunities, why wouldn't I just make an effort to make sure that other people can have something similar to what I had or even better? So now what I am doing volunteering wise is that I am part of the board of a foundation called Creamos, and we work with women who are victims of gender violence and that live nearby the Guatemala city dump. And the foundation provides them with childcare, with psychological support, with education and technical training so they can access jobs. And of course, the foundation also works with the private sector to reduce the stigma that these women have around because they live in a really dangerous area of Guatemala City. So when they go and try to find a job, they're usually discriminated against because of their origin. I think just for me, seeing them thrive and just finding joy in their lives and really exploring their potentials, which is something that I really want everybody to be able to do, just makes sense. That's why I love to do volunteer work.
That's amazing. I think it sounds like incredible work that you're doing. Thank you very much for taking us through that. Can't imagine how difficult that must be at times for those women. Now, as you know, the Founders Voyage community, it sort of spun out of, to some degree, the MIT Bootcamp program or the alumni of that group. Have there been any programs or frameworks or tools that you found since you went to, I believe, the 2017 bootcamp? Have you found any other sort of tools or resources that you found particularly useful for you in your, entrepreneurial journey or your career or even in your more personal life?
So for me, definitely tool set that I am glad I acquired is systems thinking. Definitely it helps a lot. I have a couple of book recommendations that I'm going to share with you guys that help me really understand the world a bit better. Then I have, I think, design thinking. I would say human-centered design, because I used to be very like, oh yeah, I'm a STEM girly. I'm very like scientific, and what humans think doesn't matter because science is inexorable, like. And then I realized, of course, it's not the case because science is meant to solve problems for humanity. And of course, if you are solving a problem for someone, you have to think about that person. You have to think about what they want, who they are, what's behind them, their motivations, and all of that. So design thinking and human-centered design, I think that's really important if you want to either design projects for people or become an entrepreneur, because you have to think about the perspective of those you are serving. Then, since I am a curious person naturally, I have studied a couple of programs on negotiation. And then the last one that I did was on public policy innovations, because I wanted to work in public policy in my country, mainly because I realized that if we don't engage the public sector actively, it's going to be very difficult to actually move the needle forward, because the private sector can only do so much. At least that's the case for Guatemala. And I led a project related to public policy innovations on open banking, venture capital, alternate finance, and green finance. It was very successful. And the main reason for that, of course, was definitely not what I studied, but was that I found the right partners to do it. So a skill set that I acquired was being more social, which is something that you cannot study anywhere, I would say, but you study when you understand who you are as a person and what are your limits. So for me, understanding that it's not sustainable to, let's say, go to 4 events a week because I would die, really helped me understand, okay, maybe I'm going to prioritize which events I definitely have to be in and be a active part of, and not be relegated in a corner because I am overwhelmed. And so acquiring that skill set really helped me to, okay, get to know the right people for the project to move forward and connect the right people with the right people. So it's like you are putting a puzzle together and figuring out which are the pieces that need to fit in order to get the picture. So I think those are the skills that I've been exploring ever since the bootcamp. And it's been a fun ride.
I really appreciate that answer, because especially the part where you're talking about becoming more of a socialite. I don't know if a lot of people think of that as a skill set, but I certainly do at this point. Some people think, once an extrovert, always an extrovert, or you're an extrovert or an introvert. And I, read this like overcomplicated article and I was like, yeah, I think I'm an introvert who can be extroverted like when I need to, or I'm an introverted extrovert. Because when you said, I would like to just be sitting home on Saturday night, petting my dog and watching a movie or something, Like, I totally identify with that. But if you need me to go out and lead a group of people, I can do that. And I think it's so great that you were able to identify like what you needed to also access that part of yourself. Hi there. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you mind leaving us a review, a like, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform? Thanks so much. That really helps our reach. The Founders Voyage podcast is now proudly sponsored by VidOps. Kane at VidOps has been taking care of our editing since early 2024. He works efficiently, and I'm sure you'll agree that he does a great job. Thank you to VidOps for helping bring this podcast to life. If you want the same great support we're getting for your podcast, or you need help with video, photography, or animation, you can get 10% off at vidops.io using our referral code Voyage. That's vidops.io, referral code Voyage. Now back to the show. So kind of building off of that, how do you find the balance that you need now as a person between your work, your family life, and everything else that you're passionate about?
I think that's a very difficult question, and I am just finding the answer myself.
And
So,
there's not a right or wrong.
yeah. So last year, for example, I definitely have to admit I was burning the candle in both ends. I'm working as a project manager in Swiss Contact. I am part of the board at Creamos. I am in a couple of boards of investment funds as well. And then, of course, I got married in 2023. So I'm like newlywed some way, somehow.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. And so for me, last year was a year of actually figuring out that I was not finding the balance. I was just like trying to scramble and do everything because everything felt important. And to that degree, everything is important. Like, I love the work that I do. I love getting to write projects and to see them being executed and the impact that those projects have, and to talk to the people who have been benefited by the project. Like, it's amazing. I love being a part of the board at Creamos. I love being a part of the investment funds that I am working with. I love my husband. So everything is just on a degree of importance that is like, I want to do everything, right? But then I realized, okay, I'm not prioritizing something that is important, which is myself. And I cannot pour from an empty cup. I was not prioritizing my health, my physical health, my mental health, all of that. And then I had I would say, a very tiring last trimester of 2024, where I just sat down. I was like, okay, this is not sustainable in the long term. Like, I am going to break down, and I don't want that to happen because I want to live a happy, fulfilled life. And when you are working yourself to the point of exhaustion, you start losing the joy in the things that normally brought you joy. And so for me, it was like, okay, I have to sit down and figure out a way in which I can continue to work and I can continue to do what I love without leaving myself behind. I talked to my boss and I was like, you know what? Like, I need a reframing the way that I'm working with you guys at Swiss Contact. And I want to have like a half-time consultancy type of thingy here, so I can actually dedicate myself to continue to explore my other passions and to kind of study more, because I had not been studying for the last year and I am a person who needs to be constantly learning. So I was not doing that. I kept studying my languages, but I don't think that was cutting it, I guess. I decided, okay, I need to review this and I need to do a full stop and reframe it for here. As of January this year, I'm just working like half time in my position at Swiss Contact. I am starting another project, which is we are trying to improve the way investors connect with entrepreneurs in the Central American region. So that's something that has me very happy because it's new and I'm creating it and brings me joy to structure new things. And then, of course, my engagement with Creamos and the other investment funds is more, I wouldn't say sparse, but it's more like sprints of activity. It's not like a constant thing that I'm doing, but it's like, okay, we have a meeting today and I'm here for the meeting, but the rest of the month I'm engaged in other things. So that works well. And then I think a really important thing for me was finding ways in which I could move my body that would bring me joy. because I really wanted exercise and health not to feel like a task, but to feel like something that is bringing me wellness and happiness. And so I got into Pilates and yoga, and that is helping me tremendously with my mental health. And I am not constantly mad right now. So that helps a lot. But just finding things that bring you joy and that help you be well with yourself, I think that's the right balance. And as you said, it's never a right or wrong answer. And it's not something that is written in stone. You can change it. You have the power to change it. For me, just that was the end of last year, sitting down and realizing, okay, something's got to give and it's going to be me. So let's do this.
I think you came up with quite a few great quotes there. I like you saying how you can't pour from an empty cup and something's going to break. And if you stayed how you were doing, it will be you. I think those are brilliant points that a lot of people who are, very passionate and excited about the things they're working on really need to acknowledge and be aware of. It's so important to have some level of balance. Like you can have periods where you're, working really hard, but you need to be able to find that balance at times. And I think it's very wise of you to have realized that and worked on improving it. I think that's really great. You're doing a lot of interesting projects within the entrepreneurial space with investors and everything like that. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the startup culture is in Guatemala? And I guess if you're comfortable with it to some degree, a little bit more about the project that you said you're starting up.
Sure. The startup culture in Guatemala and Central America has quite changed in the last few years. Definitely, we didn't used to have as much of a startup culture, I would say. Naturally, Guatemalans and Central Americans, we are very entrepreneurial people, but it's usually traditional businesses like mom and pop shops and, like very kind of brick and mortar type of things. And that's what essentially keeps our economies going. Like a lot of the businesses in Guatemala and Central America are small and medium sized businesses of the traditional sort. And so I think when entrepreneurship was introduced as a concept to our country, we already kind of had a culture of it, but it was not within the terms that we are used to discussing it, in external ecosystems, because that's one thing. Like when you talk about, let's say, startups and venture capital and everything, even the terminology is in English that is difficult to translate to ecosystems in which the primary language is Spanish. Because when you try to bring that to people who don't speak English, it feels kind of exclusionary. And the only ones that are included are the ones that are already part of the circle, if that makes sense. So it was, I would say, a difficult thing to make venture capital and to make startups somewhat inclusive of the local culture and of the local people, or of those who weren't able to connect with external ecosystems. Because at first it was like a club, right? If you belong, and if you don't, then you're not here. So I think what the evolution that I have observed in the last few years is that more and more venture capital and creating startups is becoming a widespread thing. Of course, it's not accessible for everyone just yet. And I think there's going to be a couple of years before that actually happens. But people from underrepresented backgrounds are now leading startups in the country, which is, I would say, one of the better manifestations that the startup culture is really permeating, because it is reaching people that it didn't reach before. And so now we see health tech startups, we see ed tech startups, quite a lot of them. We see a lot of active investment funds and angel investors. And I think also on the investment side, what has really contributed to that movement has been the impact investing sphere in the Latin American region. Like more and more, we're realizing that not only investors have to invest with impact, but startups also have to consider impact and positive social, environmental impact when they are structuring their solutions. Because we are no longer in a world ecologically, economically, in any way, shape, or form, in which we can allow ourselves to only make money, you know? And so I think that has shifted the mindset quite a lot in Guatemala and Central America, and has mobilized capital in a way that we hadn't observed before, and has also brought about founders who are thinking in more creative ways to solve the societal problems that we have here. I think one of the most interesting behaviors that I have observed is when the startup culture started, like the market was usually that middle class or people who already had money to spend, right? Because you wanted to get them, you wanted their money, and you wanted to sell somewhat expensive products or services at a price point that made you make money rapidly without such a huge base of people, right? But now Central American startups are working more and trying to figure out to create solutions, how to create affordable solutions for the base of the pyramid, which I think makes a lot of sense because a lot of our population here, at least in Guatemala, 60% of the people live below the poverty line. You have a huge mass of people that are in need of solutions, and they are a market themselves, like really understanding that they also need solutions and they are also willing to pay for them kind of shifts the way you think about problem solving and startup creation. The wonderful thing about that, well, not so wonderful because it means like we need to do something about poverty. But the good thing about that, if you are a startup, is that if the model works with the population here, it can also work in the Southeast of Asia, for example. It can also work in Africa. It can also work in other countries which are experiencing poverty the way we are. And it can also bring solutions to them. That is one of the main changes that I have observed. Regarding the projects that I'm working on, and sorry, this is such a long answer, but I'm really passionate about it. The main one that I'm developing now, it is a project that is based on inclusive finance. And what we are doing is we are working with rural finance service providers to develop better mechanisms to allocate capital in companies funded by women, young people, indigenous people with disabilities, migrants, and internally displaced people. So we work with them to introduce technology and better evaluation and risk evaluation practices so they can become more efficient at funneling capital to the companies led by these vulnerable populations. And then I'm also working in the project that I'm structuring right now, which is a new one, like the inclusive finance we are about to launch and make it operative essentially. So that's cooked. But the one that I'm cooking right now is we are using AI to better evaluate profiles of impact startups in the Central American region to improve their investability. And so that's still being developed. We are kind of in the process of validating the platform and then the technology, and that all works the way it's supposed to. But we're hoping to launch in the second trimester of 2025.
That's really fascinating. I'll look forward to hearing more about that. By the way, no need to apologize. Like, we love passion, and you're making an impact that we're very curious about and have a lot of personal and professional respect for. And I love what you said about, seeing the commonalities in that product market fit in multiple cultures and continents. Like, that's, kind of taking that boot camp. I mean, it doesn't just exist at boot camp, but what I think of as, that training and kind of seeing it through that global lens, which I think is the best way to use it. So that's really cool. If you don't mind, I'd like to pass to another community member that has a question kind of building off of that. Giovanni, do you have audio to ask your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks a lot, Andrea, for the many insights. My question would be, where do you think your personal passion and desire to have startups and entrepreneurs come from? Thanks a lot.
I think it comes from a strong desire to allow people and allow others to have better opportunities and to have a fulfilling life. It makes sense for me. Like, I want others to be happy because if other people are happy, are fulfilled, then it benefits me. Like, if I live in a community of people where everybody gets access to what they need, where everybody can go to bed satisfied with their day, I don't have to fight with my neighbors, I don't have to, like, it just makes sense for people to have access to education, to clean water, to fulfillment, because that is going to give us societies in which we help each other and we're there when we need each other. And of course, this is like a story that is very close to my heart, but my grandmother, she used to be almost illiterate, house worker. So she was born in a little village in Guatemala in the mountains. Already her story was very difficult because her mom was a single mom and she had to migrate to Guatemala City because she needed to find a job at a very early age. And she learned how to read because she was working as a maid in a house for these wealthy people, and they kind of taught her how to read basic things. And then she went on to start a small business, and she then married my grandpa, and they had their kids, and they had access to education. And then I look at my life right now, which is tremendously different to what her life was like. And I'm like, this is just two generations of opportunities. This is just two generations of access to education, to integrated families. And I have a pretty good life. So I want that for other people, you know? So that's where it comes from. And of course, it comes from recognizing as well that I am only human and I'm very limited and I cannot do everything. And there's a ton of other people who are way smarter than me. And if I can help them build solutions that I not even in a million years could build because I don't have the skills, the time, or the creativity to do so, then let's help them because they're going to be able to do things that I wouldn't even think about in my wildest dreams. So if I can be a part of that, that would be amazing.
Incredibly well said. It's hard to understate the value that access to education can have to people. And I really like the mentality that you're talking about of if other people who have different skills and different knowledge base have access to education and opportunities, then they can bring more into the community that I can benefit from. I think that's really powerful. This question, I think we almost certainly asked you last time we talked with you, but the question is, what words of wisdom do you want to leave us with today? It can be a favorite quote, something you saw on TV, some advice someone gave you, something you thought up yourself, whatever it is. What would be sort of the advice that you'd want to leave specifically today?
I think it's two things. The first one is be silly. Don't be afraid of being silly. And it could be like saying something you've been wanting to say for a long time to somebody like, oh, I love the way those glasses look on you. Or I love the way those headphones make you look, Nancy. You look amazing. And so just being silly and being kind, I think, of course, when silliness is paired with kindness is amazing. You're never going to regret just being kind to somebody. You're never going to regret like going and saying that compliment, of course, when it's nice and respectful. I think that's the balance. So be silly today. And it being silly might mean like, oh, I've always wanted to learn how to draw a panda bear. I'm going to go and buy myself some crayons and do it. And it's going to bring you so much joy. So go ahead and do it and don't postpone it. Like use the fine china, wear your fancy clothes. Like life is very fragile and very finite. So don't wait for things to happen to you in order to figure out that your life is yours and you can treasure it. And so be silly. That's the first one. And the second one would be don't be afraid to be bad at something, because being bad at something is the first step to actually becoming good at something. And you may never become good, which is something that is happening to me with knitting. But that is also valid. Like just because my socks are ugly, it doesn't make them any less warm. They're warm and comfy. So just being comfortable with recognizing like, oh yeah, I am learning and I am just pacing myself with this. You're going to be fine. Take the leap, learn something new today, and don't be afraid to be bad at it, I guess.
All great advice. And I really love what you said, just because my socks are ugly does not mean that they're not warm. I feel like it's an analogy for so many parts of life, to be honest with you. And, to keep going, like, even when you do feel like you have ugly socks, sometimes that's in the eye of the beholder, right?
True that.
I really appreciate everything shared with us and taught us. And it's such a pleasure, like, to be, part of this community with you and to have had the chance to get to know you, because of the MIT boot camps and then because of, this group. So thank you so much for honestly sharing who you are. The reason that we continue doing this is that we know that other people will hear your story and be inspired, to pursue their passion. And I know that's something that you're very passionate about as well. So thank you so much. Thank you so much again, Andrea. And if you're listening and interested in our previous conversation with Andrea, you can find the edited podcast episodes at foundersvoyage.org, or you can look up Founders Voyage on your favorite podcast platform. And if you'd like to support us continuing to edit this podcast, you can do that directly through our Patreon, patreon.com/foundersvoyage. So thank you so much again, Andrea, and thank you everyone that joined us live. And we wish you a great day and evening ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a lovely day, everyone.
You too.
Thank you. Let's talk soon.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.